Welcome to the Afropolitan podcast, hosted by Eche Emole, founder of Afropolitan. On the show, we chat with Afropolitans whose footprints form the foundation of systems dedicated to building the future of a bold and progressive Black community. In each episode, our guests share their working formulas, the hard facts about leaving familiar terrain, embracing the unknown, and staying relevant afterwards. Listen as we extract the blueprints of fearlessness, innovation, and progress.
In today's episode, we chat with Adia Sowho, Chief Marketing Officer of MTN Nigeria, the leading mobile operator in Nigeria. In this episode, Adia talks about the power and future of connectivity and how she remains relevant by knowing how to navigate intergenerational spaces.
Hey, Adia. Welcome to the Afropolitan podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm doing great, Eche. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I feel like I kept on bugging you, and I'm so glad to be able to get you. I'm like, it's about 6 a.m. my time, and I'm like, look, we're going to be up. I've been up since 5 because I didn't want to make sure that we miss this. I'm like, look, I need to get Adia on here for sure because I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for stopping by.
Well, thank you for introducing me as a diva, so everybody's now going to think, oh my God.
No, definitely. But it's because you're such a busy woman who's doing impactful work and you're not here for the time wasted. And I think I appreciate the time everyone takes to stop by the podcast because I know that they've really fit me into their very busy schedule. So again, thank you for stopping by the Afropolitan podcast. Awesome. So let's transition to your role as the CMO of MTN Nigeria, as well as being the first woman to occupy that position. How did that happen? And can you provide our listeners with a little context?
How did that happen? I feel like my last few jobs, have very interesting sort of origination points. It wasn't like I wasn't looking. I was trying very hard to take a sabbatical, but that really wasn't working. And this conversation started with someone just calling me and saying, "Hey, I know you're not looking for a job, but give me your resume anyway." Right?
let me hold it for you.
One of them kind of things, right? And it was one of those. I was like, "Oh my God, here we go!" And a few curse words later, I gave her my resume. I didn't even update it because I was just so like, can I be on a beach? But pandemic and turnarounds and all kinds of stuff was just getting in the way of me living my baby girl life. But apparently, I seem to be the only one that doesn't realize that this was the job would be a good fit. So yeah, it just started with a conversation, and a few more conversations. Later, many months down the line, I started as the CMO.
Well, and how's the experience been so far?
Pretty cool, actually. I really can't, just getting to grips with the understanding of the role, because it's a pretty broad remit, right? So, it's called the Chief Marketing Officer role, but it does cover marketing, and strategy, right? So it's a pretty broad remit. So just figuring out, and of course, I'm not a classic CMO, but interestingly, I think I'm a CMO that a tech company needs, right? So just meeting my team, which is pretty big, about 100 people, and then figuring out, where the team is, right? And to build a world-class, marketing organization, there are lots of different things to look at. You look at, product delivery, brand perception, how effectively you converse with the customer. So just looking at the business itself and then the people behind the business. But so far it's been pretty interesting, and then you're walking into the incumbent telco in the country. I mean, the company that's driving essentially digitization, in the country, and, just trying to come to grips with what does the next 20 years look like, right? So MTN has been responsible for putting phones in most of the country's hands, putting connectivity in most of the country's hands and homes, right? But what happens beyond connectivity for those that are now comfortably connected, right? And then, what does being underserved look like with connectivity? And then what does being unserved look like with connectivity? And just figuring out what's the story for the next 5, 10, 15 years, if that's even possible to imagine. Definitely. With the way tech moves these days.
Yes. Adia, I'm so grateful that you pointed out that MTN is a tech company, right? Like it seems like in all of this like tech bro conversation, the telcos are forgotten as actual the first tech bros, right?
The original tech bros.
So in terms of like rebranding that narrative, like, hey, we are a digital company, would you say that that's part of your role? Because most people wouldn't see an MTN as a technological company, even though that is really what it is, right? It's driving telco or tech or even mobile money in different countries and hopefully soon in Nigeria. So what does that rebranding look like for a company that's seen as more of an institutional and incumbent versus like the new, shinier tech startups that are coming into the market?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to believe that's one of the reasons, I was the eventual pick for this role, because I have that mix of experience, right? I worked for telcos, and arguably in the telco space, I worked for the startup telcos. For most of my career, I was always working at challenger telcos. So this is the first time I'm working for the telco that's number one in the market, right? So, and then having spent a few years in the startup space, saying, the massive opportunity that a bridged divide between MTN and the rest of, the ecosystem, and just the role that MTN can play in just digitization in general, of life, of the economy, and what happens to an economy when it's digitized, right? It just turns over faster. It turns over money, value, information, connections faster, right? So you just, there's definitely an important role that could possibly be played, but it you've got to stay connected to that purpose, right? And I that's my hope, is to try to from my role, reconnect MTN to that deeper purpose and start taking the conversation forward. What happens beyond connectivity? How do we make MTN a part of the next bunch of unicorn stories? Either MTN is potentially providing some critical infrastructure that allows these companies to emerge, right? Because if you think about the things that stimulate companies, that there's usually a trigger, there's usually an event, there's usually some type of digital infrastructure that's available. Like in fintech in Nigeria, for instance, much of the growth was triggered by, the availability of BVN, right? And that drive to create that that single financial identifier, right? So then you start to think, about all the companies that were birthed, all the different types of companies that have been birthed out of that single massive initiative, that single massive piece of digital infrastructure that now exists. So, the question now becomes, okay, what else? What other types of infrastructure need to be digitized, and what role can MTN play in creating that infrastructure and then continuing to be part of the growth story, the entrepreneurial, youthful growth story, of technology companies in Nigeria. And, MTN Nigeria is a massive part of MTN Group as a whole, right? So, there's a strong likelihood that, things that happen in Nigeria then become a template for the rest of, the opcos on the continent, and I think MTN really wants to and is starting to step into its African identity, right? I think it's a unified, single African identity. So I think it's going to become, it's a good thing to happen right now with what's happening within the tech space across the continent. I think the timing is, fortuitous.
Definitely. I think even to give people more context for people who don't know, Nigeria is the largest market for MTN, I believe, in Africa.
Correct. It's the largest market for MTN, period.
And are there some other highlights that we can push out there in terms of number of subscribers to the network? Is it 100 million now across Nigeria?
God, look at you giving me work. No, it's not 100 million. So we're not too far. It's 68 million.
That's still huge. That's number one in the market.
Yeah. I mean, that's like 68 million is like an African country, a massive African country, just actually a massive country, period, right? So, so yeah, we've got 68 million subscribers, and the MTN Nigeria business is around a third of the size of MTN Group. So it's a pretty significant chunk. Not to remind myself of how much pressure I'm under, but okay.
We're getting to 100 million. That's the goal. But so at Afropolitan, right, we started off as an events company, right? And then at some point, we then realized we could drive more value for customers. So what we then said to say to people was, we don't just want to party with you. We want to go through life with you, right? And when we look at the MTN story, it's like MTN could have chosen or to just, hey, we're here to just give you guys talk, text, data, leave us out of it, right? But going that further step to drive value for customers and saying, hey, we could actually also provide financial services for you, right? And it's actually more seamless. What would you say is the promise for mobile money in a market like Nigeria or even across Africa in general?
I think that transactions are the bedrock of how will I express this? I think transactions help you leave your footprint in the world, right? And that footprint helps you build wealth. So whether we like it or not, right, to sort of quantify, validate, and sort of verify, any intent to build wealth, you need transactions. So I think the mobile money or any type of digitized financial service allows you to start to create a record of an individual so that you can create a wealth path for that individual. That also, allows us to create legacy, right? So unfortunately, Africa's legacy design has been, usurped by it's been, usurped by the rest of the world. So we can't really, it's like you said earlier, podcasts are oral history, but, in large part, history has been written. Okay. Yes. And this is how Africa has, kind of gone left behind, so looking at financial services, records of transactions are, financial history and do support wealth creation. And that's really, the place that financial services have. It's not just about, one bill paid today. It's about, multiple bills paid at different times over time, right? Then a company can take a look at that person and say, okay, I can trust this person with X amount of money, or I can trust this person with this, value exchange, right? If you can't make that exchange in real time. So that's what transactions buy you. They buy you that gap between, I've paid for something and I'm waiting to get it back, or I've put money towards something and I'm waiting to get it back. That history is what buys you that trust. And that's especially important, because trust is infrastructure, right? And in the absence of that infrastructure, you can't build society, in the way the world looks today. I mean, since Africa is not going to go recolonize the world and do it the way we used to do it, we have to
They have to start from somewhere.
Yeah. We have to actually fit into the world that we exist in. I think that's been part of the struggle, right? Is sort of, resolving our identity in this iteration of the world that we didn't necessarily create or inform or have credit for, our contributions. Does that make sense?
Definitely. No, it makes total sense, because one of the issues that I've seen companies struggle with is try to put Western solutions on our own local context, right? And it's like, no, that's their own reality. That's not our reality, right? Our own reality is, this is where we're at. These are the cards that we've been dealt. What are we going to do with it? Right? It's like you have to focus on your reality. And I think that's a very great observation that you made. But in terms of your background, Adia, I feel like this is just going to be an inside joke between me and the rest of the listeners. Are like, why is she laughing every time she says her name?
Yeah, I'm just going to keep laughing. Yep.
In terms of the background, right, would you say you have had a better time maybe working in startups versus now you're an established incumbent? When you come into a system that's already been there, maybe been there obviously almost 20 plus years, maybe, right? Having to insert your own value system, your will into the chain, would you say maybe do you prefer startups versus an incumbent? What has been your experience so far?
I think I've got the best of both worlds, to be honest, right? Because having grown up in structured corporate environments, right, you really don't understand of structure. Because think about it, when you get your first job, back when
Adia, sorry, it cut off there when you were going into the explanation.
Okay, I apologize.
Yeah,
someone called me. Okay, all right, so starting again?
Yes.
So to your question, I think I have the best of both worlds, to be honest. Working in established companies at the start of my career just made structure a very natural part of my work existence, right? So even when you are, your first day, your first job, somebody takes you to where you sign up for health insurance. Someone teaches you where to pay, where to pay your taxes. Someone gives you that sort of financial, education, that health education, just boom, straight. You have no choice. It's there. You take it. You are taught it's important, and you do it. Right? And then you're probably given some type of orientation. You start doing your job, blah, 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 blah. You get trained along the way. So all that stuff is there, and you don't have to figure it out. Like lots of people don't really understand the cognitive load, right, that figuring anything out puts on you. You know what I mean? Especially when you're young, you just expend the energy and you're like, yeah, I'll just figure it out. But then how many things will you figure out? You know what I mean? So there's that. Just sort of understanding the benefits, the consistency that structure provides. And consistency is extremely important when you're trying to generate value. You can't just be changing the way you generate value on Monday versus Wednesday. You can't pivot every day. So some consistency is important, right? Because then you now start to enjoy the way that value compounds. Okay. So that's sort of the general benefit of corporates. But with startups, in the absence of that context, you learn to at least try to build natively, right? So you talk about building native for iOS, you talk about building native for, Android, right? But with startups, you have an opportunity to build native for Nigeria, for Africa, for your actual local context. You have an opportunity to truly reimagine a need, around your capabilities, right? And you're free from, the constraint of structure. Because structure can be imprisoning if you don't leave room to breathe, right? So startups also, don't have resources. And as we say, necessity is the mother of invention. So therefore, startups are naturally a much more easily creative environment, because you don't necessarily have much to work with, right? And all of a sudden you find novel ways to do the same thing that somebody would have taken much longer, gone through 25 processes to execute. So I found myself, so when I left corporates and I went to startups, the goal there was to bring structure to the startups. When I did the turnaround, the goal there was to bring structure to that startup, right? And now that I'm back in corporate, it's almost like I'm breaking down the structure to allow creativity to surface, to say, okay, you don't need to do something that's that complex. Let's do an MVP. Treat everything like an MVP, right? In corporates, you don't do an MVP. You just you think and bake and add and until it's perfect. Then you do your first release. But I'm like, no. Give me the the wheelbarrow version. We can build a Rolls Royce later. You know what I mean? Let's do this. The wheelbarrow is going to get us from point to point. Let's start with that. So that's now what I find myself doing, in the corporate. So I'm grateful for the fact that I have the experience of both worlds. But it's funny, the conversations I have with startups are almost predominantly around, okay, I need structure. I don't know how to think about this. I don't know how to make this consistent. And with corporates, it's like, oh my God, we're stuck. How can we be innovative? How can we change? How can we sort of just, recognize, what's around the corner and be ready to lean into it, properly. So I think definitely both worlds have their values, but they really should learn from each other. That's what I think would be ideal.
It's so interesting because bringing that iteration process to like more of a corporate setting, it's so different versus maybe in startups they're used to more iterating. Like we start from an MVP, we do V1, we do V2, we do V3. I remember my co-founder at Afropolitan now is someone who has a background at KPMG, and then when she came in, she brings all this structure. And I remember like earlier on when she came in, we were talking about brand colors, and I'm like, brand colors, like, oh, what is that? Like, it's like we just usually let the designer do it. She's like, no, it has to be this structure. This is how it has to be. These are the processes that happen. And you just start to get a very great appreciation for the structure that brings, because you want the company to be able to run without any of the founders or anyone. Like, you should be able to plug and play once you have onboarded people, right? And I think that's a great thing. Sorry.
So here's what structure does, actually, if you're a founder. Here's what structure does. Structure runs the company when you're not there. Like, we need to remember that there's a lot of mental and emotional pressure for the people that start a company, right? Yeah. And applying structure allows the company to function, right, without you directly supervising it all the time. Structure allows you to, take a mental health day or go on vacation, right? So that's the importance of structure.
I love it. I love it. The thought that keeps coming into my head, and please correct me if I'm wrong with this comparison, but I feel like some people would describe you as the Olivia Pope of the Nigerian tech ecosystem. I don't know. Has anyone ever said that to you?
Yes.
Okay. It's like I've had that comparison most recently, I think, because of the turnaround. But before that, I was the Sheryl Sandberg of the startup ecosystem. I mean, whatever. I wish somebody would compare me to like Naomi Campbell or something. I think then I could be like, super flattered. You want to be the baby girl of the
There you go.
That is covering all your bases, because you don't want them to keep you in a box. It's like, no, I too want soft life, please. So then let's transition to the work you did at Thrive Agric, right? Like, it's like you came into the middle, I would assume, to provide structure as well. What would you say that experience was like for you? And especially with all the expectations, I'm sure everyone had of you, right? Like, you're coming into this, you don't necessarily, I don't think you necessarily had any prior like background with the founders, but you come into it, you're here to execute, you're here to turn around the ship. Like I said, Olivia Pope of the industry, right? How did that experience shape you, basically?
that was pretty cool. I mean, it's so funny. So I often say to people that you want to be careful how you challenge yourself, right? You don't want to change too many things at once when you're changing a job. So you've got two levers to pull. You've got the competency, which is maybe the skills you need to do the job, and then perhaps the industry. So I think with Thrive, having this understanding and being asked to come in as CEO, I was like, okay, I can come in as CEO, but at the time, I'm going to out myself here. I legit thought maize and corn were two different things. Don't ask me why. I never actually sat down and thought about it, but I was just like,
no. But I can see why though. I can see why.
Right. But that was quickly disabused once I joined the team. So joining the team, I had to, of course, being a turnaround, I had to go very, very quickly into diagnostic mode, right? And to try to figure out what was wrong and if I was the person that could fix it. Because that's the thing, like when you're stepping into a leadership role, you have to really, it's not just reading the job description. You have to ask whether, your style of work, management, leadership, what happens to results when you walk into a room as a leader, is even possible, right? So because you're really, really accountable, right? And your accountability, there's no buffer for the accountability, right? It's either like, okay, if this goes well, it's Adia. If it doesn't go well, it's Adia. There's no other person to look at, right? So I think I had to be extremely focused, more focused than I've ever had to be in my life on solving the problem, right? Because usually you have a lot of energy. You're like, okay, there are 15 problems. I'll start tackling 12 of them. But in this particular case, I was like, I'm only meeting the staff that are directly related to this problem. I will meet everybody else later. You know what I mean? So I had to be extremely, focused and create that structure to drive that focus, within the rest of the team so that we could address the problem in an organized manner, which we did. So again, I spent a lot of time bringing in structure. And structure it's not one of these things that, it's not as big a word as it sounds, right? Structure is, a 10-minute stand-up every day, right? But just making sure you have it every day. Structure is making sure that you are not just gisting in the stand-up, right? You are actually surfacing salient issues in the company. You're checking whether the thing, the heartbeat of the company, continues to beat, right? So or the heart of the company continues to beat. So it's not like you're just getting there and giving random updates. No, there can't be randomness. So it's from meetings to, documentations to consistently checking results to, making sure that the reactions to the results is consistent. So that kind of was how I went through that process. But it's not easy to kind of jump in and, rescue a situation, but credit to the founders. You'll hear me say this a lot. For the founders of that company, I'm very proud of them, and the leaders that they are today. And then they have the humility to ask for help, because it's usually tricky, right? Because we're all navigating intergenerational workplaces these days.
Yes.
Right. So, where I'm from, the generation that still remembers what a cassette looks like, right? I use them. I had a ton, I'm stepping into offices where, all of a sudden, experience has a lot less value because you can type any question you like in Google and get an answer. And the person that does that will show up and legit level, themselves with you and be like, yeah, challenge me. So it's tough to kind of be trying to solve a problem and meet people and navigate, all of these kinds of issues. But it was definitely an amazing experience, for me. I'm very proud of the company and that it's still, standing, and very proud of the founders too.
Yeah, I just want to go on record as saying I see why I kept on bugging you to come on this podcast, because this is probably the best conversation I've had, and I've done a ton of these episodes because, like I feel like your mind is just so expansive, and I wanted to like thread the whole needle, right? But what I want to ask again is. Background, because you used the word diagnostic, right? And the thought that came to mind, I have a legal background, and part of what I learned in law school is like your ability to triage, right? So you come into a situation, you prioritize ruthlessly, and you execute. Bringing that same mindset to Thrive, right? How was that getting buy-in from like team members who may, like when you're triaging like that, it's like, look, this is what it is. We need to amputate. Right? Like, we need to amputate this leg. This is the leg that needs to go. And then the people with that leg obviously might feel a type of way because it's like, it's my leg. Like, I want, can we not save my leg? You're like, no, the leg is going today, right now, actually. It's off. So what does that look like? Buy-in from other team members to go forward with this new vision of how things need to be executed on?
So that's interesting, and it ties back to what I was saying about intergenerational workplaces. I find that I have to explain things quite differently, right? So of course this happened like when I was at Migo. I joined. There were some really young Silicon Valley data scientists who joined the company before I did. And it was interesting for me personally, just learning to navigate being questioned, by someone that has, he didn't exist for like half my life. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, okay. so my approach to, justification, or sort of like how I get my team to respond to what I'm asking them to do, it changed or it evolved. Right, so I usually tell people why, and then I usually give them freedom to, comment, share, blah, blah, blah. So in the case of Thrive, it was a very, very complex situation that did not seem easily explained. So again, my ability to triage, like I've been training for this stuff, right? I'm an engineer, and then I became a management consultant, and I just know how to look for problems, right? Because I've been looking for problems for, eons. So you get there, and when you walk into a room and the people in the room are not able to articulate the problem in the way you're able to articulate the problem. That I think, game recognizes game, right? So when you enter there, you've explained, and you're like, okay, is this a problem? Or you're asking questions at the same level as the people that are in the room, that's at the same level as the so-called experts. It helps. Right, but you have to be sharp. I can't sleep. I mean, like when I say, I don't mean that literally. Yeah. But I can't. You can't be caught lacking. I can't be caught lacking. You know what I mean? So I pride myself on, walking into a room knowing enough to be, dangerous, right? And I guess there is a curiosity. There's a natural curiosity that sort of, enables me to, to do that. So on one hand, one day I'll get up and call, Preston, and we'll be talking about, SEO on his websites and rankings and, monetization models, or whatever, right? Or I'm going to poke my nose in some other startup founder's business and be like, well, have you done this, and this? You know what I mean? So, for me, it just comes from, having that thirst for knowledge and then being articulate enough to, get my point across in a credible manner and not just resting on the authority that my experience does actually give me, but that, Gen Zers will just give me the finger for having. You know what I mean?
Gen Zers don't respect credentials too much, but it's still important, right? Like but there's like you still have to prove yourself despite how much your track record is. How does that usually make you feel? Because it's like you're consistently reinventing yourself for a new challenge, right?
I mean, I think what happens is what has happened is eventually that opinion doesn't hang around very much, if you know what you mean.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Yeah. It can be a little difficult and sometimes insulting because it's not like people tend to, especially Gen Zers. I've not found that they invest in being eloquent. You know what I mean? They're just like with the shit.
Vibes and inshallah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's almost like, well, you still live with mommy and you Uber everywhere. So what vibes?
Please, don't drag us like this. Don't drag us.
No. Okay, look. I'm probably going to start sounding like a big auntie, but here's my point. It's I get it, right? I see that the questions are asked because, younger people are looking for older people to be making data-driven decisions, and they want to understand. And I get it, but it's just, I came from in my time when I started my first job, there was no medium. I couldn't announce every, job move or publish my results. You know what I mean? And there weren't as many dashboards. It was much harder to get information about anything, right? And so, everybody has to go through, that change. And I think for me, it's less about reinventing myself for a particular generation, but it's more about allowing my skills mature with what the industry or what my surroundings need. Right. And I think it's not wise to allow your skills to expire, right? Because you just will be less relevant, and I'm grateful that, I'm quite relevant, in the spaces that I play in, but that takes a lot of work. It takes chasing a lot of, knowledge. But then, like you said, there's a conversation that needs to be had between both generations.
Definitely. So I wanted to transition back to the telcos and the fintechs and the banks and that relationship, right? Especially with MTN, I believe, going into the mobile money sector in Nigeria. Do you see this as a collaborative process between the fintechs, the telcos, and the banks? And I'm sure you know about some of the conflicts that have happened in the past between the banks and the telcos, especially the USSD. Right? What are your thoughts about the overall space?
I think that the primary frustration of collaboration between, and anybody in Nigeria is the lack of trust. And that lack of trust is not just in people, it's in everything. It's in surroundings, it's in infrastructure. I mean, the road you take to work may or may not be there tomorrow. You know what I mean? And you won't find out until you take that road.
Yeah, the road,
So, because nothing is certain, it brings it's almost like a bloodlust to negotiations. Yeah. So you are looking to extract the maximum from the very next payoff. Right? So what that robs us of is long-term strategic thinking. Which is the luxury of somebody with a full stomach. Okay, so until you and your company sort of, figuratively have full stomachs, you can't be thinking, long term and thinking strategically. It's tough to think win-win in that situation. So what I find is that inherently people are thinking, win-lose, and they're really not thinking about making decisions that make the pie bigger. However, I think that some startups are occupying a space between corporate giants, right? And when the corporate, and I mean, call them giants in the Nigerian sense, right? But like when those giants are in the room together, they can't agree. But then if a startup goes and maybe deals with both of them separately, then all of a sudden they are now in this agreement that, they didn't necessarily sign on the same piece of paper, but they're in the same deal.
Yeah.
So
now they can talk.
So that all of a sudden there's a conversation there, but as long as, we don't have to be confronted with our mutual big manism, that's fine. So I mean, hopefully, the startups that are listening to this, right? Please keep making companies that do that because it just makes it easier for those collaborations to happen, right? So unfortunately, going back to my original point, short-term thinking, which is an unfortunate outcome from a low trust infrastructure light environment, that's just kind of where you're going to see that's just the mental level you're going to see deals happening at, right? But I hope go on.
I feel like I could go on this whole rant about what that scarcity mindset has done and wrecked across the ecosystem, right? Like, because Naval says, like, play long-term games with long-term people. And in order for you to be there long-term, you need to understand compounding, right? Like compounding in terms of relationships across the board, and a lot of times I'm left frustrated dealing with other people who don't understand the win and help win mindset,
I agree. I mean, like, I could argue that my last 3 roles, right, not to talk of numerous other opportunities, have come from relationship investments or positive results or good work that I did 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 15 years ago. It's just this stuff will follow you around. So you've really got to manage your reputation and whatever you bring to the table whenever you're invited to it, right? It's easy to sort of, don't get me wrong, the world is big enough, where you can just, give some people the finger and then move to Canada, right? And it might not matter, right? But, if you're going to, you don't know what you're going to need tomorrow. So making those relationship investments, makes a lot of sense. Having a good track record makes a lot of sense, because I think for us, speaking of oral traditions, people are going to ask about you, right? And, it's very, Uyibo to think that the rumor mill doesn't matter. But man, it hasn't let me down. Around here, I hate to say it, I mean, it's almost like even if you just put one ear in it, you just start hearing the same thing said about the same person. And then even if you still reserve your judgment, that person will still, it usually comes full circle. For me, that's what I've seen. So I think that you're right. Those relationship investments need to be made. But there is a lot of pressure to not behave like that. There's a lot of pressure to not behave like that, which makes it even more valuable when you see it,
So, Adia, if the only thing left in the world to be was a book about your life, what would the title of the book be?
Oh my God. I feel like you might have an idea, and I totally want to hear it. Because I have no idea. Because there are many books I could write, right? Because, look, first of all, just being a woman, and working in tech in a bunch of different spaces around the world, that's a whole other, that's one whole story. So there's, being a woman, and then the professional side of being a woman, then the personal side of being a woman in those same spaces, navigating leadership, how all that stuff changes, before you become a leader, after you become a leader, blah, blah, blah. But, I don't know. I'd like to write that book, but tell me, what do you think the title will be?
The one that comes to mind is The Fixer.
I get that a lot. I think somebody put that on the pillow and sent it to me.
The Fixer, or if I wanted to make it more engaging, it's like have a fire, call Adia. Before you call 911, call Adia, basically.
Some people might agree with you there,
I really love it. What I really appreciate about it is a lot of the work you do. There's so much that doesn't get said, right? Or maybe the appreciation doesn't get like shown to you as much, right? Because as a fixer, it's like you do this almost on automation, right? Like you've done this many times. You come in, you handle the business, and it's people come to just expect that excellence, right? So sometimes it can get taken for granted, and it's just, to me, it's very important to shine the light on what you do, because people take it so much for granted, and it's like when it's not there, they're like, wait, where's Adia? Where's Adia like this? You know,
I know, right?
It's like it's that appreciation of like truly like the work that you do, and I'm glad that at least on this podcast we want to highlight and really celebrate you in that way. You know.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'd also appreciate being able to take a sabbatical once in a while. So let this be the message I put out to the universe through the Afropolitan podcast. Please, next time I want to take a sabbatical, can no companies just fail during that period? Can we just be...
Nobody asked for your resume too. Just it's like, no, I'm not sending it. So are there any books that have had a profound impact on your life?
The Sovereign Individual would be one. I don't even think I got past 30 pages of this book, but it completely messed with my head. Totally messed with my head. And it really put me on it adjusted the mental axis with which because I'm a bit of a culture junkie, right? And it just helped me, start to understand economics in a very different way, at a first principles level, so that I could, situate or resituate my thinking in the digital age and the internet economy and cryptocurrency and all of that. So that's an amazing, book. The second book I read recently that I thought was super interesting is a book called The Formula. And this book is for all my fellow smarty pants out there that feel like, they do good work, but they don't know how to talk about it, and they feel like they shouldn't talk about it. You better go read this book and start talking about what you do, right? So, because it helps you sort of understand how the world works, and how people think, and how to stay authentic, but have that authenticity reflected in your work. So it's a book called The Formula, and it has to do with figuring out the inputs to success. Like, why is somebody considered successful? What is it about them? Is it good work? Is it talkability? Is it publicity? What is it? And then figuring out how to, activate that for yourself. I mean, those are the two I can think of, because I'm usually terrible at answering this particular question. But yeah, those two stand out.
No, but I love it. And what we do is we put in the show notes for the podcast, we always highlight the books and a link for where people can go get them. Everyone gets to deal with failure at some point, right? What would you say was your first encounter with failure when you started your career journey, and how did you deal with it, and what did the experience teach you?
Oh my God. So I grew up, I'm a first daughter. So it took me a really long time to start to love failure. And now I'm almost giddy about failing. You know what I mean? Like, it gets very excited. I won't talk about my first, but I'll talk about one that really, really, really stayed with me. So I grew up top of my class. Everywhere I went, that was just sort of natural for me. And I'm setting this up so that you understand the gravity of what I considered a failure. Yeah. And then I got to university, and then things were a little tougher, right? It was tougher for me for a variety of reasons that were really out of my control. And I couldn't be as good a student as I normally was. So I graduated with a second class lower. So for me, that was a very deep and profound failure. That's what it felt like. I couldn't look at my degree for 10 years, easy. I didn't want to see it. I didn't even want to see the color of the jacket it was in. But, because my parents had drummed into me that you have to keep your records. Otherwise, I probably would have burnt it if I was that kind of person. I really... Wow. Because it just wasn't me. You know what I mean? I was not used to that. At that time, I still used to believe that my identity was driven by, things like that.
Yeah.
But after a while, I made my peace. I found other achievements. I did well, in other areas of my life. But that looking back now, that was such a ridiculous waste of time, to feel bad over something like that. I mean, but it's how you're taught, right, to grow up, is that your identity is how much money you have and what degrees you have and the grades you get on those degrees. And, I definitely identify as a smarty pants. So, so that would be it, but I mean, clearly, when I tell people that was, that's my story, they don't believe it. They're like, what do you mean? How could you? But I got a 2-2. I'm, that was me, so that was the first one, but yeah, I've gotten over it now, thankfully. Gosh.
Man, I can only imagine. I was just reflecting yesterday that I've been done with school since 2018. Law school was the last. But ever since then, though, I would always have these weird dreams where I would wake up and it would be, I dropped out of school, or I just realized that this was no longer the path for me, that I didn't need this validation anymore, right? And I was like, I wanted to go into entrepreneurship as fast as possible because I felt like being in this arena is what I wanted to prove myself in. And I would wake up and I'm like, wait, you did actually finish school, your diplomas are here. I'm like, damn it. There was just this whole thing about it. But it's interesting, the things that we seek to give us validation at the end, and then you realize, I have to validate myself, right? And it's like, yes, it might be to in that institution, but your life has been first class, right? And it will continue to be first class. And I think it's expanding the boundaries of what success means to you and achieving it, right? There's a quote that I've been reflecting on recently where I think Naval says, it's a calm body, a fit mind, a house full of love. These are things that cannot be earned, or they cannot be bought. They have to be earned, right? And it's really brought it home to me, because we do all this work. We're out there striving, but you really can't afford to lose focus on what's truly important, right? It's like, when it's all said and done, there are other things that are going to market for you, and Adia, I guess this is where I truly appreciate you stopping by the Afropolitan podcast. Like, I've even taken you past the time that we agreed on, so I wanted to be sensitive to it. But I feel like we could talk for hours, But I would love to definitely even connect in person when I'm in Lagos, if you're around, or I don't know if you're planning on doing some traveling this day to December, but you definitely deserve the rest and a sabbatical. Hey,
it's been fun. And yeah, hit me up. We'll talk. Okay.
Adia, thank you so much for stopping by the Afropolitan podcast, and I hope you have a good one.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Afropolitan podcast. We are building the future of a progressive Black community. To join our community, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Afropolitan. Be sure to join our Discord and Clubhouse community by clicking on the link tree on our Instagram page. See you on social.